Hello everyone, I am the Weather Dude, welcome back, and today we are going to be giving an update on the gigantic coastal storm that is expected to track across the southeast and mid-Atlantic as we head into the middle and later part of next week. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, as well as watch the video the whole way through to ensure you get the best weather content, and we're just going to get right into it here. Right before we get into the models, we're pretty much going to get straight into the models here, but just starting off, if you watched my last video on this, you would have seen this. This is the 30-day precipitation anomaly. So basically saying, how are we on precipitation compared to normal? And I wanted to focus it on the mid-Atlantic. Actually, I might actually turn down because the colors are showing a little bit too well, so that way we can see some of the locations here. Here you can see much of the area, right? New Jersey, Delaware, PA, Maryland, Virginia, down to at least the coastal portion of the Carolinas, kind of like where the storm is going to kind of hit. Mostly below average on precipitation. Most areas between 50 and 90% of their normal precipitation. And in fact, on the Delmarva Peninsula here, places 10 to 25% of your normal rainfall. So pretty well below average in these areas. If we look at the departures for normal, in terms of like how many inches of rain are we below average, most areas about an inch or two below average in terms of rainfall or precipitation. Some areas, like south of DC, for example, in the Delmarva, maybe 2 to 3 inches of rain below average. And it may not seem like much, but when you consider that in this last 30-day period, we're supposed to get 3 to 4. So if you're 2 to 3 below average, that's going to equate to a massive percentage. Right? So we do need the rain in this area, so I think it's going to be the one saving grace. It's not like the area is going to be drenched and then the storm is going to come on top of that, but that doesn't mean that there won't be flooding, because there will still be flooding from this in the areas that do get hit with it. We're going to talk about all the aspects. We're going to have strong winds. We're going to have the onshore push. We're going to talk about coastal flooding in this video as well. All this will be covered so you guys know what to expect. All right, so let's take a look at the models here. We have the GFS, European, and Canadian. We're starting to get a narrowed down time when this storm is going to hit. We're starting to get an idea, but it's still too far out for any mesoscale models to pick up on it. So we're still focusing on the global models for today. But they're showing some consistency, and they're starting to come into some sort of agreement here. So here we go, GFS. We're starting off here earlier next week. And if we move the clock forward, you can see some rain moving up the Carolinas, a little disturbance here. Here's the main low pressure moving through Alabama, bringing some pretty heavy rain with it and some thunderstorms the next Wednesday morning. Then it's going to kind of make a northward turn and start to go off the coast. It's already deepening to 1,002 millibars of pressure. Pretty heavy rain here. All right, and you can see the storm was going to be pretty, gigantic. This is a zoomed out map, so it doesn't look as big, and some models even have it bigger than this. I mean, we got rain reaching down to the Carolinas all the way up into New Jersey, so it could be a pretty big rain shield here. And you can see once it moves off the coast, pressure drops below 1,000 millibars, and you can see these pressure isobars. I don't know how well you can see them, but they are packed together pretty tightly, so the wind's going to be strengthening here, and it's going to be flowing, or wind's going to be coming from the north and east. So maybe kind of like a nor'easter. But yeah, some very heavy rain bands, especially on the northeastern side. We could be seeing some pretty heavy rain, some blinding downpours at times. And you can see though the rain moves in, according to the GFS, actually next Wednesday afternoon, pretty much through Thursday morning, and by the afternoon it's going to make its way out. But that does not mean that the waves and the winds will probably be lasting into possibly Friday. So if the storm's going to be starting, again, this is next week, by the way, not this week, but next week, Wednesday, Thursday, and maybe even Friday, you can still be feeling the waves and some coastal effects there. Maybe even a little bit more rain coming on the backside, but this is the storm we want to focus on today, so we're going to keep it right here. All right, so if we look at the precipitation forecast going through next Friday afternoon, you can see its track all the way through the southeast here, a good 2 to 4 inches of rain, even back through again like Louisiana, but also North Carolina, Virginia, the Delmarva, 2 to 4 inches of rain in this area. And again, it's not going to be lasting for too long, maybe 12 hours. So when you saw in that map I just showed you earlier, right? 3 to 4 inches is what we're supposed to get in the last 30 days, or in a 1 month period this time of year, we're supposed to get 3 to 4 inches. And we could get a month's worth rainfall in, about 12 hours, maybe a little bit more than that. Maybe 12 to 24 hours. So that's still pretty significant. Any precipitation deficits, I think, will be wiped out if this model were to prove itself right. I think these precipitation deficits will be wiped out. So let's take a look at the European model. We're starting off here by next Monday morning. You can see cold air coming in behind that last system here. Again, this is this Monday coming up. Now the European model is actually probably a little bit more lackluster of the of the three models. There's still going to be some rain though for North Carolina and Virginia. You can see some rain moving through. I think it's going to be further south though. All right, see the system kind of meanders down towards Alabama, Georgia, Florida. There's really not as much in terms of steering current, so the storm just kind of lingers down off the coast. It kind of just sits here, and then it will eventually start to track off to the east. It does form into a coastal low, but it's rather a weaker one. Wouldn't cause much in the way of any kind of wave impacts. But interestingly enough, they do have a low meandering in the Gulf of Mexico, and we know the sea surface temperatures are warming up there, so maybe a little. Obviously, the wind shear is still kind of bad, so maybe a subtropical storm could form out of that. It's only a week from today, so we do have to watch that kind of closely. But the European doesn't really develop it much. But they do have a little storm system coming up by next Saturday, and then another low swinging in behind that. So the European still does have a coastal storm, but it's not the same one that we're focusing on in this video, and it's a little weaker. Even the one they do have showing by next Saturday is weaker than the others that we're going to see here today. So what's the rainfall looking like? Mainly about a ½ to 1 inch along the Carolina coast up to Delmarva. All right, again, I think down again, Florida, Georgia, you'll see a couple pockets of like maybe a couple of inches of rain, a little bit more, since that's where the storm kind of meandered off towards the south. Now, the Canadian model is going to interest a lot of you, especially if you're living in the Carolinas, especially North Carolina. The Outer Banks I'll be focusing on, especially later on in the video as well. But also the Chesapeake, the Delmarva, and the Mid-Atlantic. If you guys are especially there, you're going to want to watch the Canadian model. So you can already see, I mean, the low is only just about leaving Alabama at this point. We already got a massive rain shield with it, especially on that eastern side. The precipitation shield goes from like Tampa, Florida, all the way up into like Virginia, right? And the pressure is already below 1,000 millibars, so you already know it's about to get strong. And there you go. All right, right here, the low is still over land, 993 millibars of pressure. The isobars on the north side are absolutely packed together, so lots of wind. And again, we're going to get into specifics on the wind in just a little bit. Very heavy rain for the Outer Banks, especially around Kitty Hawk and Nag's Head. All right, so definitely going to be areas to watch there. And there you go. The low is still sitting right off Virginia Beach, 990 millibars of pressure. You got a heavy rain band between D.C. and Virginia Beach. Still a lot of wind going to be coming in. Winds could be, very strong here. I don't want to give any spoilers. And then you can see the low this thing is just massive. I mean, the storm is like this big, all right? And given how consistent this is, this could potentially stick around. Again, if there's any updates, whether, the storm is going to be much stronger or much weaker than expected, of course, I'll keep updating you guys. But just because of how consistent this looks from the last time I did it, and even from when I looked at the models a few days ago, this is still pretty consistent. So the models are onto something here. But again, if anything changes for the better or worse, I will definitely keep you guys updated. And you can see here, right in this zone, that's where the isobars are even more packed together than before. 988 millibar low. And the winds are going to go pretty much going right into Virginia Beach, right into Nag's Head in North Carolina there on the Outer Banks. The low is still deepening, 984 millibars of pressure. So even though maybe the wind and rain are going to be done at this point, this is by next Friday, do expect those waves to still be coming on shore, potentially being several feet high. Of course, we call some beach erosion as well. All right? So Canadian model going pretty hard on this system. And you can see some darker purples, maybe closer to 4 inches instead of 2 to 4, maybe around 4 or 5 inches of rain, and upwards of 6 in those heavier bands. And even still 2 to 4 inches across the Mississippi Valley for this storm system. Because remember, the Canadian, you can go back and see right here, they had it developing even heavy rain and low pressure below 1,000 millibars, even over the interior southeast. So the Canadian is definitely developing into something here. All right, now we're going to switch over to wind. All right, so here's the GFS model, and you're going to look off to your right side of your screen. That's where you're going to see the wind here, where the storm's going to be. So right now we're at next Wednesday afternoon. You can see, now these are sustained winds, by the way. We're going to also be looking at wind gusts, but these are sustained winds at the surface. And you can see already about 30 to 35 miles an hour. All right, and you can see it's kind of an onshore push. All right, so we're already going to be seeing an onshore push here next Wednesday afternoon. And I'm going to be flipping back and forth between the tide table. So now that we're close enough to the date, or we're starting to get an idea when it's going to hit, we're going to start looking at the tide tables here. So next Wednesday afternoon, all right, so if we go back to this this model run here, the GFS, you can see by between 11 and 2, we see that onshore push of wind here. All right, so here we go. Right here, you can see 11 a.m. Wednesday. On the bottom right of your screen, there's 2 p.m. Wednesday. So onshore push about 30, just over 30 mile an hour winds sustained. And if we look, that does correspond with the high tide. All right, and it's about a few minutes difference at Kitty Hawk, but it's not the same. But you can see, yeah, high tide is at 12:50. So right around when that onshore push is already starting to begin. So that is corresponding with high tide. That of course could be bad for these locations, but that's not the half of it, right? So let's take a look here. So here's the low pressure, right? Kind of like a hurricane, you know, when the middle comes through and the center low pressure comes through, the winds may briefly calm down over this area. This is like Kitty Hawk, and this is Nag's Head right here on the Outer Banks. And here's Virginia Beach right here. But you can see the onshore push in the Virginia Beach and the offshore push now for places like Wilmington, North Carolina, Myrtle Beach, as that low is now to your north. But as it starts to get offshore, this is where I want to hone in on right here. So at hour 1:47, this is Thursday, 11 a.m. Low pressure is right here, and those winds, kind of like I showed you the isobars on when I was looking at tropical tidbits. You can see the onshore push right into here, and sustained winds could be anywhere from about 42 to 50 knots. So we're talking like around 50, maybe even 55 miles an hour at peak here in terms of your sustained winds. All right, and if we look at the tide tables, all right, so right around Thursday, late morning, so that's not high tide, but that is going to be rising from, because 8 a.m. is low tide, so it will be rising. And even by 2 p.m. if we look at this, right? If we look at 2 p.m., for example, we can move to 150 here. Yeah, there was, even at 2 p.m., there will still be that same onshore push right here of about 40 to 50 mile an hour winds, sustained, by the way. All right, well, we haven't even gotten to the gust yet. So that does correspond again with Thursday's high tide. So be on the lookout here, because this does correspond with the high tides, and of course that is bad news for some additional coastal flooding, maybe a couple feet in the water levels rising above what you would normally see in situations like this. All right, so now we'll go back to this briefly for a bit more to show you those winds kind of tracking up the shore. All right, the low tracking offshore, and don't forget. I don't want to leave out the Delmarva coastline, even up to New Jersey. You can see right here, it's going to be kind of parallel to the coast, but kind of an onshore push. Right here, you can see still 35 to 40 knots in terms of wind, so maybe as much as a little over 40, peaking at 45 miles an hour in terms of your wind speeds. And again, closely corresponding, if not corresponding, almost directly with high tide. Now let's take a look here at the wind gusts. All right, again, same model, just looking at wind gusts this time. And you can see that by 11 a.m., you can see here's the low right here. And you can almost start to see these reds starting to build now. So now we're talking like a little over 50 knots. So 55 to 60 mile an hour gust. Most of this area is actually offshore. That wind core is kind of offshore, but some of it, I think, those peak gusts could reach 50 to 60 or 55 to 60 miles an hour for places like Kitty Hawk and Nag's Head and Virginia Beach as well. All right. Because remember, 144 and 147, right in between there, I think, because the low will be closer to the shore by that point. And then by hour 150, you can see again this wind tunnel pretty much still hitting the Outer Banks. All right. And even, of course, because remember, the Delaware Bay as well is right here. So that's going to be on the south and western shores of the Delaware Bay. Right? If you live on the Delaware side, you're going to be feeling an onshore push as well. So don't forget about that. But yes, offshore, but the peak winds here, you can see the max 60.6 knots. So pretty much close, almost hurricane force. That's like 4 knots away from hurricane force. So that's like about 67 to 68-ish miles an hour. But those winds should remain offshore. But again, if we're looking from last video, we know that we saw almost a potential for 65 mile an hour winds on the coastline. So this is definitely going to be moving around and being fine-tuned. But yes, still expect very strong winds, pretty much remain the same from what we talked about last time, if not getting even stronger. Now let's take a look at the European model. That was a GFS. European model, not as strong with the winds because the storm was kind of little bit weaker here. You can still see winds will still be hitting about 25 knots, and they will be onshore, and winds could get, and that's about a little over 30 miles an hour. So, and again, that is corresponding with Thursday's 2 p.m. high tide at Nags Head. So definitely be on the lookout for some minor coastal flooding, even if it doesn't look as significant as you might think. All right, now let's take a look at the Canadian model. Now the Canadian model, here we go. So here comes the storm next Wednesday, next Thursday. Low is offshore now. Boom. There you go. Because that wind tunnel, because there's not as much wind on the eastern side. It's on that north and northwest side of that low is where that stronger wind core is. And you can see it right here. Boom. Angled right at the Outer Banks. And you can see winds sustained, by the way, 53 knots. So that is like over 60 miles an hour sustained. And if I had access to the wind gust map for this model, it would most likely say over 65 miles an hour. All right, so we're talking like upper tropical storm, the higher end of the tropical storm, closer to almost a Category 1 hurricane wind strength. The good news is, though, it shouldn't last for too long. As you can see, there again, when the storm's to the west, the winds will, of course, be coming out of this direction. As you can see, when the low is here, winds will be rotating out this direction. So there will be an onshore push briefly on Wednesday afternoon with the Outer Banks high tide at about that afternoon hour. If we go back here, you can see about 12:50 p.m., then about about an hour later each day, just about. And you see 1:51 p.m. there on Thursday. So there's the minor onshore wind, and then it will still be onshore coming out of the south. But as the storm moves off the coast, now we start to see that switch over to more of a northerly wind. But still, I mean, they're getting it from all angles here. But the southern end, like the southern coast of North Carolina here, we'll start to see an offshore push, while the Outer Banks will still be feeling it pretty good from the wind here. And you can still see anywhere in the red, by the way, is tropical storm force wind. Remember, this is sustained wind. So all of that is still, I mean, it's mostly over the water by this point because the storm is moving away, but still has a massive wind chunk. So do expect this over land as well, because I know the wind graph has a hard time showing these over land, but still do expect some pretty strong winds, even inland as well. But of course, maybe not being as strong. And finally here, we're going to take a look at the wave heights. All right, so we're going to take a look at the GFS here, and of course the European as well. So let's take a look at these waves. You can see offshore waves could get up to 20, 25 feet here, but even for like the Outer Banks, for example, if we go to 2 p.m., pretty much should be like the peak of the storm here. 14-foot waves for Kitty Hawk, Nags Head, even Avon as well. Sorry if I mispronounced that. But even as the storm moves north, and it's just going to expand out like 25-foot waves here still, we will still have even like 8, 10-foot waves up the Delmarva coast, the Delaware coastline, the Jersey coastline, even almost up to Long Island. 8-foot waves, 9-foot waves. So still some pretty big impacts will be expected even on the northern mid-Atlantic side. So thank you guys for watching today's video. Of course, I will keep you updated should anything change further. Thank you for watching. I am the Weather Dude signing off. Till next time, I will catch you guys in the next video.